They laughed when Aaliyah Brooks fell into the pool. A 21-year-old black student, working 3 jobs, soaked, humiliated, treated like she didn't belong. But hours later, everything flipped. In a hospital hallway filled with panic, the same people who mocked her were now begging, because the girl they pushed down was the one person who could save everything. And when the truth came out, no one spoke, not because they didn't have words, but because, for the first time, they realized they were the ones on trial. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The Weight of Invisible Chains. Boston, Massachusetts. A cold autumn wind swept through the narrow streets and across the historic campus, carrying with it the faint scent of fallen leaves and distant rain. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the city like an unspoken weight. Aaliyah Brooks walked quickly across the stone pathways of Harvard University, her worn backpack pulled tight against her shoulder as if it might otherwise slip away. Her breath formed soft clouds in the chilled air, but her pace never slowed. Aaliyah Brooks was a 21-year-old African-American college student, calm yet resilient in appearance. She stood tall, though her slim frame carried a quiet exhaustion that only revealed itself in still moments. Her deep brown skin glowed subtly against the muted tones of the campus. Her face was defined by high cheekbones and a strong, oval structure, her full lips often pressed together in focus. Her dark brown eyes, steady, determined, held a depth that most people overlooked. Her long, tightly coiled black hair was usually tied into a low bun, practical and neat. Today, like most days, she wore layered, thrifted clothes, simple, clean, but unmistakably worn. She blended into the background, or at least that's what people thought, because what they saw first was never who she truly was. They saw her skin. They saw her shoes, slightly scuffed, slightly faded. They saw what she didn't have, and in a place where perception often outweighed truth, that was enough. Aaliyah stepped into the lecture hall just as the clock struck 9. The room buzzed with quiet conversation. Students dressed in polished coats, designer boots, and effortless confidence. Laptops gleamed. Watches shimmered. She took her usual seat near the middle, not too visible, not too hidden. Professor Richard Hale entered moments later. Professor Richard Hale was a 54-year-old white American male, authoritative in both presence and demeanor. Tall, with a lean build, he carried himself with the rigid posture of someone accustomed to control. His pale skin contrasted sharply with his sharp, angular features. His steel-gray eyes, often narrowed behind thin-framed glasses, gave the impression of constant evaluation. His short silver hair was neatly combed, every strand in place. He wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp white shirt. His voice, when he spoke, was measured, firm, but laced with an underlying impatience. There had been rumors among students that he favored certain kinds of brilliance, that he trusted certain faces more than others. Today's lecture focused on advanced economic theory. Complex, abstract, difficult. Professor Hale posed a question, one that made the room fall silent. Aaliyah raised her hand. There was a pause. A flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. Yes, Miss Brooks. Her voice was steady, clear, confident. She broke down the concept step by step, explaining not just the answer, but the reasoning behind it, the logic, the implications. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Not confused, just surprised. Professor Hale adjusted his glasses. "That's partially correct," he said, though there was a slight tightening in his jaw. "But you've overlooked a key variable." Aaliyah held his gaze for a moment. Then, calmly, she clarified. And this time, there was no room for doubt. The answer was complete. A brief silence followed. He turned away. Moving on? No acknowledgement, no credit, just dismissal. Behind her, a quiet voice whispered, just loud enough. "She's probably here on some diversity quota." The words came from Tyler Whitmore. Tyler Whitmore was a 22-year-old white American male student, confident to the point of arrogance. Tall, with a broad-shouldered athletic build, he carried the ease of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. His fair skin, sharp jawline, and neatly styled blonde hair gave him a polished, almost effortless look. His blue eyes often held a trace of amusement, especially when directed at others. He wore expensive casual clothing, subtle but unmistakably high-end. To him, everything was a game, and people like Aaliyah were easy targets. Aaliyah heard him. Of course she did. But she didn't turn around, didn't react, because reacting cost energy, and energy was something she couldn't afford to waste. By midday, Aaliyah was no longer a student. She was a worker. In a small campus cafe tucked between two academic buildings, she tied on a plain apron and stepped behind the counter. The smell of coffee beans and steamed milk filled the air. Orders came fast. Latte. Double espresso. Oat milk, no foam. She moved with quiet efficiency, precise, focused, never wasting motion. A customer barely looked at her as he handed over his card. Another avoided eye contact entirely, but one person lingered. Marcus Alvarez stood at the far end of the counter waiting. Marcus Alvarez was a 23-year-old Latino-American student, observant and reserved in appearance. Medium height with a lean, slightly wiry build, he carried himself with a quiet awareness of his surroundings. His tan skin and sharp features were softened by thoughtful brown eyes that seemed to notice things others ignored. His short black hair was slightly unkempt, as if time for appearances was a luxury he didn't have. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a faded hoodie, worn sneakers. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. But there was something steady about him, grounded. Marcus worked in the university library. Long hours, low pay. Like Aaliyah, he understood survival. When their eyes met briefly, he gave a small nod. Not pity, not curiosity. Just acknowledgement. A rare thing. Later that afternoon, Aaliyah made her way to the library. The building was quiet, warm, a stark contrast to the cold outside. Rows of books stretched endlessly, filled with knowledge most people took for granted. Marcus sat behind the desk organizing returned books. "You left your notes in the cafe yesterday," he said quietly, sliding a neatly stacked set of papers toward her. Aaliyah blinked. "I didn't even realize." "You've been working too much," he replied simply. There was no judgment in his voice, just fact. She gave a small, tired smile. "Yeah, that's kind of the plan." He didn't ask more, didn't need to, because some stories didn't need explaining. That evening, as the campus lights flickered on one by one, Aaliyah stepped outside again. The wind had grown colder, sharper now. Her phone buzzed. "Mama" flashed on the screen. She answered immediately. "Hey, Mama!" Denise Brooks's voice came through, soft, slightly strained. "Baby, you eating enough?" Aaliyah smiled faintly, though her chest tightened. "Yeah, I'm good, just busy." A brief pause, a cough, subtle but familiar, too familiar. Denise Brooks was a 48-year-old African-American woman, gentle but fragile in appearance. Medium height with a thin, delicate frame, her strength came not from her body, but from her spirit. Her warm brown skin carried the marks of time and hardship. Her face was soft, her features kind, her tired eyes always filled with love. Her short, natural hair framed her face simply. She wore modest home clothing, practical and worn. Years of illness had shaped her life, but never broken her care for her children. "You don't have to do everything alone," Denise said softly. Aaliyah looked out across the campus, the glowing buildings, the laughter in the distance, the lives unfolding so differently from hers. "I know," she replied. But she also knew. She did, because behind her stood a mother who needed medicine, siblings who needed food, a future that depended on her choices, and in front of her, a world that refused to see her worth. Aaliyah tightened her grip on her phone. "I'm gonna make it, Mama," she said quietly. "I know you will," Denise whispered. Later that night, Aaliyah sat alone at a library table, textbooks spread around her. The world outside faded as she focused, her pen moving steadily across the page. Every equation, every note, every hour. It wasn't just for her, it was for survival, for change, for something better. Because no matter how invisible they made her feel, she refused to disappear. The party of masks. The wind had softened by evening, but the cold still lingered over Boston as the campus transformed. Warm, golden lights wrapped around columns and trees, music drifted through the air, and luxury cars lined the entrance of the Grand Hall. The university's annual Elite Gala had begun, a night where wealth, status, and image took center stage. Inside, everything shimmered. Crystal chandeliers reflected polished marble floors. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like silent shadows between clusters of laughter and champagne glasses. Students who, just hours ago, sat in lecture halls now appeared transformed, draped in designer gowns, tailored suits, and confidence inherited rather than earned. Aaliyah Brooks stood near the service entrance, not as a guest but as part of the staff. Her uniform was simple, a fitted black vest, white shirt, and black slacks. Clean, neat, invisible. She adjusted the tray in her hand, steadying it before stepping into the ballroom. Her movements were careful, controlled, practiced, every step measured. Because here, one mistake didn't just cost embarrassment, it became entertainment. Near the center of the room, attention shifted. Crystal Whitmore had arrived. Crystal Whitmore was a 22-year-old white American female student, arrogant and effortlessly elegant in appearance. Tall, with a slender, model-like build, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had never once questioned her place in any room. Her fair skin was flawless, her sharp, narrow face framed by perfectly styled, long, blonde hair that cascaded over her shoulders. Her icy blue eyes scanned the crowd with quiet superiority. Tonight, she wore a custom-designed silver gown that caught the light with every movement, subtle but undeniably expensive. Everything about her presence said one thing: control. Around her, people gathered instinctively, laughing louder, standing straighter, trying to be seen. Crystal smiled, but it never reached her eyes. Aaliyah moved through the edges of that circle, offering champagne without a word. Most hands took glasses without acknowledgement. Some didn't even look at her face. But Crystal did. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that single second, something unspoken passed between them. Not curiosity, not confusion, but recognition, not of who Aaliyah was, but of where she belonged, or rather, where Crystal believed she belonged. Careful, Crystal said softly as Aaliyah stepped closer, her voice smooth, almost pleasant. You wouldn't want to ruin the night. The words sounded polite, but the tone beneath them was not. Aaliyah nodded once. Of course. She moved on, because she had learned something long ago. Not every battle was meant to be fought out loud. At the far side of the room, near a secondary bar setup, another figure worked quietly. Maria Santos. Maria Santos was a 35-year-old Latina immigrant woman, warm yet weary in appearance. Medium height with a sturdy build shaped by years of physical labor, her tan skin carried the marks of long days and little rest. Her round face was softened by kind brown eyes, always alert, always observant. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, practical and efficient. She wore the same uniform as Aaliyah, though hers looked more worn, slightly faded at the edges. Maria had come to the United States years ago, chasing stability for her children, and every job she took carried that purpose forward. She noticed everything, especially people like Aaliyah. You okay? Maria murmured quietly as Aaliyah passed by. Aaliyah gave a small nod. Yeah. Maria studied her for a moment longer, then simply handed her a fresh cloth. Just in case. No questions, no pressure, just understanding. Across the room, near a column partially hidden by decorative arrangements, Marcus Alvarez stood watching. He wasn't supposed to be there. Technically, he was part of the library staff assigned to assist with event logistics earlier that evening. But once his tasks were finished, he lingered, just long enough to observe. Marcus Alvarez was a 23-year-old Latino-American student, observant and reserved. Medium height, lean build, his posture slightly tense as if always prepared to move. His tan skin contrasted with the dark hoodie he wore beneath a borrowed event jacket. His brown eyes followed movement carefully, catching details others ignored, like the way certain people laughed, or the way others were excluded. He saw Aaliyah moving between groups. He saw the way conversations paused for a second longer when she approached. He saw the way Crystal watched her, and something about it didn't sit right. But Marcus didn't move, didn't step in, because he understood something else, too. In places like this, stepping forward came with consequences, and people like him didn't get second chances. Back in the center of the ballroom, the energy had grown louder, more relaxed. Music pulsed through the space and conversations blurred into a steady hum. Aaliyah adjusted her grip on a tray filled with champagne flutes. One step, then another. Her focus remained steady until a subtle shift. A foot extended, so slight it could have been dismissed as accidental, but it wasn't. Time slowed. The tray tilted. Glass slipped. And then, impact. Aaliyah's body hit the edge of the pool before plunging into the cold water below. The sound of splashing cut through the music. Then, laughter. Sharp, immediate, unfiltered. The kind of laughter that didn't hide its intention. Water soaked through her uniform instantly, dragging the fabric down, clinging to her skin. The cold hit her chest, her arms, her lungs. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Because the shock wasn't just physical, it was something deeper. Something heavier. Voices echoed around her. "Did you see that? Oh my God, that was insane!" Someone stepped closer to the edge. A young man extended his hand. Daniel Pierce. Daniel Pierce was a 21-year-old white American male student, playful in appearance but lacking depth. Medium height with a lean build, his casual confidence masked a tendency to follow the crowd rather than lead. His light brown hair was slightly messy. His smile easy, but often insincere. He wore a fitted suit that suggested effort, but not character. "Here, I got you," he said, grinning. Aaliyah hesitated for half a second, then reached. Their hands met, and just as quickly, he let go. She slipped, fell again, another splash, more laughter, this time louder, because now it was intentional. At the edge of the room, Marcus clenched his jaw. His hands tightened at his sides. He took a step forward, then stopped. Because stepping in meant being seen, and being seen meant risk. And risk was something he had learned to avoid. Near the ceiling, small black domes reflected faint light. Security cameras, unblinking, recording everything, every movement, every face, every moment, but no one looked up, because no one believed it mattered. Aaliyah pulled herself out of the pool without help this time. Water dripped from her clothes, her hair partially undone now, strands clinging to her face. No one offered a hand again, because the joke had already landed, and the audience had already laughed. She didn't look at them, didn't search for faces, didn't react. She simply walked straight through the room, past the music, past the laughter, past the silence that followed her like a shadow, until she reached the restroom. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, and for the first time that night, everything stopped. The noise, the eyes, the weight. She gripped the edge of the sink, her shoulders shaking slightly as the cold finally caught up with her. Water dripped onto the floor beneath her, forming small, quiet puddles. Then, the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, uncontrolled, because there are moments when strength doesn't mean standing tall. It means allowing yourself to break, where no one can see. A soft knock came at the door. Then it opened gently. Maria stepped inside. Without a word, she held out a towel. Clean, dry, warm. Aaliyah looked at it for a moment before taking it. "Thank you," she whispered. Maria gave a small nod. "You don't deserve that," she said quietly. Aaliyah didn't respond, because whether she deserved it or not, it had happened, and tomorrow, she still had to wake up, still had to work, still had to keep going, because behind her stood a life that didn't pause for pain, and in front of her, a future that demanded everything. She wiped her face, took a breath, and steadied herself because this wasn't the end, not even close. Survival over pride. The next morning, Boston felt colder than the night before. The sky was pale, almost colorless, and the wind carried a sharp edge that cut through layers of clothing. Students moved across campus in clusters, voices low, laughter returning as if nothing had happened, as if the night before had simply dissolved into memory. Aaliyah Brooks walked into class on time. Dry clothes, hair neatly tied again, face composed, as if nothing had happened. Because survival mattered more than pride, her steps were steady, her posture upright, not defiant, not broken, just controlled. The kind of control built over years, not days. Inside the lecture hall, conversations paused for a fraction of a second as she entered. Not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to be felt. Then they resumed. Because people rarely linger on discomfort they don't intend to fix, Aaliyah took her usual seat, opened her notebook, focused forward. No one mentioned the party. Not the fall, not the laughter, not the cameras that had quietly recorded everything. Professor Hale continued his lecture as if nothing had shifted. His voice remained precise, detached, authoritative. If he noticed anything different in the room, he gave no indication. But someone else did. Ethan Carter sat 2 rows behind her. Ethan Carter was a 23-year-old white American male student, calm and observant in appearance. Tall, with an athletic, balanced build, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that didn't rely on attention. His fair skin contrasted with the darker tones of his simple, well-fitted clothing. His jawline was defined but not harsh, and his warm, gray-blue eyes held a thoughtful stillness, like someone who listened more than he spoke. His short, brown hair was neatly styled, but without the rigidity of perfection. There was something different about him, not louder, not stronger, but more aware. He had been at the party. He had seen everything. And unlike the others, he hadn't laughed. Now he watched, not in curiosity, not in judgment, but in quiet recognition. Aaliyah didn't turn, didn't acknowledge it, because attention, even the kind that felt different, was still something she had learned to navigate carefully. By afternoon, the rhythm of her day had already shifted, from student to worker, back to student again. At the campus cafe, the pace felt faster than usual. Orders stacked, voices overlapped. Machines hissed and steamed without pause. Aaliyah moved through it all with practiced efficiency. 2 cappuccinos, medium roast, no sugar. Her hands moved automatically, her mind splitting itself between tasks, counting change, remembering orders, calculating time, because every minute mattered, because every dollar mattered. Across the counter, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Rough night?" Marcus Alvarez leaned casually against the edge of the counter, though his eyes were sharper than his posture suggested. Aaliyah glanced up briefly. Something like that. Marcus studied her for a moment, noting the faint tension in her shoulders, the way her movements were just slightly more rigid than usual. He didn't ask more. Instead, he reached down and pulled something from behind the counter. A small toolkit. "You still riding that bike?" he asked. Aaliyah blinked. "Yeah, why?" "Because the chain's slipping," he replied. "I saw it yesterday." She frowned slightly. "I didn't notice." "You don't notice a lot of things when you're running on 2 hours of sleep," he said, not unkindly. There was no judgment in his tone, just observation. "Bring it by the library later," Marcus added. "I'll fix it." Aaliyah hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Thanks." It wasn't a big moment, but it was something, and sometimes something was enough. Later that evening, behind the quiet walls of the university library, the world slowed down. The noise of campus faded. The pressure softened, just slightly. Aaliyah wheeled her bike through the side entrance, careful not to draw attention. The chain had been slipping more than she realized, each ride a little more unstable than the last. Marcus was already there, crouched near a workbench. Without looking up, he said, "Leave it there." She did. He examined the chain, the gears, the worn edges. "You've been pushing this thing hard," he muttered. Aaliyah leaned against a nearby shelf. "I don't really have a choice." Marcus gave a small, almost humorless smile. "Yeah, I get that." He worked quietly, hands steady, precise. The sound of metal clicking into place echoed softly through the space. "You ever think about slowing down?" he asked after a moment. Aaliyah shook her head. "Not an option." He nodded, didn't think so. There was a brief silence between them. Not uncomfortable, just real, because both of them understood something most people around them didn't. That survival didn't come with breaks. After a few minutes, Marcus stood. "Try it now." Aaliyah tested the pedals, smooth, stable. "Better?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "A lot better." Marcus shrugged slightly. "Just maintenance." But it wasn't just that. It was care. Even if neither of them said it out loud. The next day, back in class, something unexpected happened. A major test, unannounced. Professor Hale distributed the papers with his usual efficiency. "No discussion, no collaboration," he stated. "You have 1 hour." Aaliyah read through the questions. Difficult, complex, but familiar. Her pen moved steadily across the page, each answer precise, each step calculated. By the time the hour ended, she had completed every question. Confident, certain. When the results came back 2 days later, the room buzzed with quiet reactions. Some relieved, some frustrated, some confused. Professor Hale stood at the front, papers in hand. There was 1 perfect score, he said, a pause, a glance. Aaliyah Brooks. The room went still, not with admiration, but with something else. Doubt. Suspicion. A student raised a hand. "You sure that's right?" Another voice followed. "Yeah, I mean, no offense, but—" They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't have to. Professor Hale's expression tightened slightly. "I will be reviewing the results further," he said, "just to ensure academic integrity." The words were careful, professional, but the implication was clear. Aaliyah felt it, like a weight pressing against her chest. Not surprise, not anger, just familiar. From the side of the room, another voice spoke up, calm, firm. "That's not necessary." Heads turned. Professor Elena Ruiz stood near the back. Professor Elena Ruiz was a 41-year-old Hispanic-American female professor, composed and perceptive in appearance. Medium height with a balanced, confident posture, she carried herself with quiet authority. Her light olive skin and soft oval face gave her a warm presence, but her dark brown eyes were sharp, analytical, observant. Her black hair was pulled into a low, neat bun, and she wore a simple but elegant academic outfit. Years ago, she had been one of the few women of color in her field, and that experience had shaped her, teaching her not just knowledge, but resilience. "I reviewed her work," Elena continued. "It's correct." Her tone left no room for debate. Professor Hale hesitated, then nodded. "Very well." But the damage had already been done, because doubt, once introduced, didn't disappear easily. After class, as students filtered out, Ethan Carter remained seated for a moment longer, watching, thinking. Then, as Aaliyah gathered her things, he stood and approached. Not too close, not too fast. "Hey," he said simply. Aaliyah looked up. There was no arrogance in his expression, no hidden intention, just sincerity. "You did well," he added. She studied him for a moment, trying to understand. Why now? Why him? "Thanks," she replied, her voice neutral. A brief silence followed. Then Ethan nodded once, and stepped back, not pushing, not pressing, just leaving space. As he walked away, Aaliyah felt something unfamiliar shift beneath the surface. Not trust, not yet, but something close. Because for the first time since the night of the party, someone had looked at her and seen more than what the world tried to reduce her to, the night of humiliation. Boston's night air carried a damp chill, the kind that clung to the skin and lingered long after the wind had passed. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement, and the city moved in its usual rhythm. Cars passing, voices fading, lives continuing without pause. For Aaliyah Brooks, the night wasn't a time to rest. It was another shift, another job, another step toward survival. She adjusted the insulated delivery bag on her back as she rode through narrow streets, her repaired bike moving smoothly beneath her. Marcus had done his job well. The chain no longer slipped. The ride was steady, predictable, unlike everything else. Her phone buzzed. New order confirmed. She glanced at the address, then slowed. Her grip tightened slightly on the handlebars, because she recognized it. A large house near the edge of campus. Bright lights. Music already spilling into the street. Crystal Whitmore's circle. Again. For a moment, Aaliyah considered canceling. Just one order, just one moment. But then, her mother's face crossed her mind. The hospital bills, the medication, her younger siblings waiting. And just like that, the hesitation disappeared. She rode forward, because survival didn't leave room for comfort. Inside the house, the atmosphere was louder than the gala. Less elegant, more reckless. Music pulsed through the walls, laughter overlapped with shouting. Bottles clinked. Conversations blurred into noise. Aaliyah stepped through the door, her uniform different now. Simple delivery attire, practical, functional, still clean, still neat, still out of place. Heads turned. Recognition came quickly. Whispers followed. "Isn't that, yeah, the pool girl?" Laughter, quieter this time, but sharper. Crystal Whitmore stood near the center of the room, surrounded as always. Her appearance was different from the gala, less formal but no less controlled. A fitted designer top, perfectly styled hair, flawless makeup that hadn't shifted despite the chaos around her. Her icy blue eyes locked onto Aaliyah the moment she entered. And this time, she didn't hide the smile. "Well, look who decided to show up," Crystal said, her voice carrying easily through the noise. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." Aaliyah said nothing. She stepped forward, steady, focused. "Delivery for Tyler Whitmore," she said, reading from her phone. Tyler appeared from behind the crowd, drink in hand. "Yeah, that's me," he said casually, barely glancing at her. "Just leave it there." Aaliyah placed the bag on the table, moving efficiently, already preparing to leave. "Payment," she said calmly. Tyler paused, then smirked. "Right." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and dropped them. On the floor, right in front of her. Silence flickered for half a second, then laughter. Not explosive, not overwhelming, just enough, just intentional. Crystal tilted her head slightly, watching, waiting, testing. Aaliyah looked down at the money, then bent. One bill, then another. Her movements slow, deliberate, because dignity didn't pay hospital bills, and survival wasn't about pride. Behind her, a voice muttered quietly, "This is wrong." The words came from a young woman standing near the edge of the room. Emily Carter. Emily Carter was a 21-year-old white American female student, soft-spoken and uneasy in appearance. Medium height with a slight, almost fragile build, she carried herself with hesitation rather than confidence. Her fair skin and light brown hair framed a face that often seemed caught between speaking and staying silent. Her green eyes reflected discomfort more than judgment. Raised in privilege, she had never questioned her surroundings, until moments like this forced her to. But she didn't step forward, didn't intervene, because awareness didn't always lead to action. Aaliyah finished picking up the money, stood, extended her hand. "Total short," she said simply. Tyler laughed. "You serious?" Before he could say more, another movement cut through the room. Ethan Carter stood up. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp enough to break through the noise. The room shifted, because Ethan didn't move like the others. He didn't perform. He acted. His expression wasn't loud, but it was clear, and for the first time that night, someone wasn't laughing. "Enough," he said. The word wasn't shouted, but it carried. Crystal's smile faded, just slightly. "Relax, Ethan," she replied smoothly. "We're just having fun." He didn't look at her. He walked straight toward Aaliyah, his movements controlled, but there was tension beneath them now. The kind that had been building, waiting. He reached for Aaliyah's arm. "Let's go." The grip was firm, too firm. Not violent, but not gentle either. Aaliyah stiffened. "Let go," she said quietly, but he was already pulling her toward the door. The room watched, silent now, because something had shifted. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was something else. Outside, the cold air hit them both. Ethan released her arm. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice lower now, stripped of the edge it had carried inside. Aaliyah stepped back immediately, putting distance between them. Her eyes met his, not angry, not soft, just guarded. "I didn't ask for that," she said. Ethan frowned slightly. "I know, but they've always been like that," she cut in. "You stepping in doesn't change it." The words weren't harsh, just honest, and honesty often carried more weight than anger. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration flickering across his face. "I couldn't just stand there." Aaliyah studied him for a moment, then shook her head slightly. "That's your choice," she said. "This is my reality." The difference between them hung in the air, clear, unavoidable. Inside the house, laughter slowly returned. Muted now, but present, as if the moment had already begun to fade. From the corner of the yard, partially hidden behind a parked car, Marcus Alvarez stood quietly, phone in hand, recording. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. This time, he hadn't stayed still, because something had changed, not in the room, but in him. The screen of his phone captured everything. The money, the laughter, the humiliation. Ethan stepping in. Aaliyah pulling away. Proof, silent, powerful, and dangerous. Marcus lowered the phone slowly, because now there was evidence. And evidence changed everything. Back on the sidewalk, Aaliyah adjusted her bag. "I have other deliveries," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Wait." But she was already turning away. Not running, not rushing, just leaving. Because staying wouldn't change anything. She walked down the street, her figure fading into the dim glow of the streetlights. Alone, but not broken, because every step she took was forward, and forward was all that mattered. The slap. The days that followed felt heavier than usual. Boston's gray skies lingered, clouds stretching endlessly above the campus as if the city itself refused to clear. Aaliyah Brooks moved through her routine with the same discipline. Classes, work, late-night study sessions, but something had shifted beneath the surface. Not visibly, not dramatically. Just enough to make every silence feel louder. Whispers had begun to circulate. Not about the party, not directly, but about her, about Ethan Carter, about the way he had stepped in, and in places like this, whispers rarely stayed harmless. It happened just outside the main academic building, late afternoon. Students passing by, conversations overlapping, footsteps echoing across stone pathways. Aaliyah stepped down the stairs, her bag resting against her shoulder. her mind already moving ahead to her next shift. She didn't notice them at first. Crystal Whitmore stood near the base of the steps, perfectly composed, waiting, and beside her, a presence that immediately shifted the atmosphere. Margaret Whitmore. Margaret Whitmore was a 55-year-old white American woman, cold and authoritative in appearance. Tall, with a slender, refined build, she carried herself with the quiet dominance of someone accustomed to control. Her pale skin was flawless, her angular face sharp and precise, as if every feature had been shaped by discipline rather than softness. Her gray eyes were piercing, calculating, unwavering. Her short blonde hair was styled neatly, not a strand out of place. She wore an expensive charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, every detail signaling status, power, and expectation. Margaret Whitmore had built her life within elite circles, and she protected that world fiercely. To her, boundaries weren't suggestions. They were rules. Aaliyah slowed, not out of fear, but instinct, because something in the air had changed. Crystal smiled faintly. "Mom, that's her." The words were soft, but deliberate. Margaret stepped forward, measured, controlled. Her eyes scanned Aaliyah from head to toe, not with curiosity but with assessment. Disapproval came quickly, without hesitation. "You're Aaliyah Brooks," Margaret said. Not a question, a statement. Aaliyah met her gaze. "Yes." There was no tremor in her voice, no hesitation, just calm. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her next movement did. The sound came sharp, sudden, unmistakable. Slap. The force turned Aaliyah's face slightly to the side. A brief silence followed, the kind that spreads quickly in public spaces when something crosses a line no one expected to be crossed so openly. Students stopped, watched, but no one stepped in. Margaret lowered her hand slowly. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but every word cut clean. "You don't belong near my son." Aaliyah didn't move, didn't react, not outwardly. Margaret took another step closer. "You think a girl like you deserves him," she continued, her tone tightening just enough to reveal the judgment beneath. "You think you can step into a world you were never meant to be part of?" The words landed heavier than the strike, because they weren't just personal. They were systemic. Built on years of belief, years of division, Aaliyah's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag, but she didn't respond, because responding would give the moment more power. And power was something she couldn't afford to lose. Crystal watched quietly from behind, satisfaction flickering in her eyes, not loud, not obvious, but present. Margaret stepped back, as if the matter had been handled, as if the message had been delivered, then turned and walked away. Crystal followed. The crowd slowly dispersed. Conversations resumed, because even moments like this eventually became background noise. Aaliyah stood still for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked in the opposite direction, because staying wouldn't change what had already been said. That evening, the call came. Unexpected, sharp. "Baby, I can't breathe." Denise's voice was strained, broken. The words barely formed between breaths. Aaliyah's chest tightened instantly. Mama, stay with me. What's happening?" But she already knew. Asthma, severe, worse than before. "I'm coming," Aaliyah said, already moving. "Just hold on." The ride to the hospital felt endless. Every second stretched, every red light unbearable. When she arrived, the emergency entrance was chaotic. Patients moving in and out, nurses rushing, voices overlapping. She found her mother quickly. On a stretcher, struggling. Denise Brooks looked smaller than Aaliyah remembered. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, her chest rising and falling too quickly. Her eyes, though tired, searched for her daughter the moment she entered. "I'm here," Aaliyah said, gripping her hand. A nurse approached, but her expression was distant. "Routine." "Please wait," she said. "We're handling multiple cases." "But she can't breathe," Aaliyah replied, her voice tightening. "We understand," the nurse responded, already turning away, but they didn't understand. Not really, because minutes passed, then more. And no one came. Around them, other patients were moved, assisted, prioritized. Aaliyah watched it happen, felt it, the quiet imbalance, the unspoken hierarchy. Then, another voice entered, firm, direct. "This patient needs immediate attention." Dr. James Carter stepped forward. Dr. James Carter was a 32-year-old African-American male doctor, composed and assertive in appearance. Medium tall, with a solid professional build, he carried himself with quiet confidence. His deep brown skin and focused eyes reflected both intelligence and experience beyond his years. His short black hair was neatly kept, and his expression remained calm, even in urgency. He wore standard hospital scrubs beneath a white coat, slightly wrinkled from long hours. Years earlier, he had witnessed similar delays affect his own family, and it had shaped the way he practiced medicine ever since. He moved toward Denise without hesitation. "Vitals?" he asked sharply. A nurse responded quickly this time because his tone didn't allow delay. Treatment began, efficient, focused, but Aaliyah still stood there, heart racing, because it had taken too long, too much. Then, another presence arrived. Ethan Carter. His steps were quick, his expression serious. "Aaliyah," he said, stopping beside her. She looked at him, surprised. "How did you—" "I heard," he replied simply. No explanation, no hesitation. He turned to the staff, spoke quietly, firmly. Things changed again, faster now. A room opened, equipment moved, attention sharpened. Within minutes, Denise was transferred. Private room, oxygen stabilized, doctors attentive. The shift was undeniable and impossible to ignore. Aaliyah stood at the edge of the room, watching everything unfold. Relief came slowly, but so did something else, a complicated weight, because help had come, but not equally, not freely. Ethan stepped closer. "She's going to be okay," he said. Aaliyah nodded, but her voice when she spoke was quieter. "I didn't ask for this." Ethan's expression tightened slightly. "I know, but you needed it." She looked at him, long enough to understand, long enough to feel the difference between intention and reality. "Thank you," she said, because gratitude and truth could exist at the same time. Later that night, outside the hospital, Marcus approached, silent, measured. He held out his phone. "I have something," he said. Aaliyah looked at the screen, the video, the party, everything. Clear, undeniable. Proof. She watched for a few seconds, then shook her head. "Not now." Marcus frowned slightly. "I know what it could do," she said softly. "I'm just not ready." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded because sometimes timing mattered more than truth. Letting go to rise. The night air outside the hospital felt quieter than the world Aaliyah had just stepped out of. The fluorescent lights behind her faded into a soft glow through the glass doors, and the steady hum of machines was replaced by distant traffic and the occasional passing siren. Boston was still awake, but for the first time in days, Aaliyah felt like everything around her had slowed down just enough to hear her own thoughts. She stood on the steps, arms folded lightly across herself as if holding something together that was close to breaking. Ethan Carter stepped out a moment later, the door closing behind him with a soft click. He paused a few feet away from her, careful not to close the distance too quickly. "She's stable," he said. Aaliyah nodded. "I know." Silence followed. Not empty, just full. Because there were things between them now that couldn't be undone. Ethan shifted slightly, his hands in his pockets. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said, his voice low, sincere. Aaliyah looked at him then, really looked, at the calm expression, the concern that wasn't performative, the effort that felt real, and that was what made it harder, because she believed him. But belief didn't change reality. I can't, she said quietly. Ethan frowned slightly. Can't what? This, she replied, her voice steady but soft. Whatever this is. A pause, then understanding began to settle in his expression. This isn't about them, he said, or my family. Aaliyah shook her head slowly. It is, she said, and it's about me. She took a step back, not dramatic, not sudden, just enough to create space that hadn't existed before. I don't have the luxury to figure things out slowly, she continued. I don't get to make mistakes and recover later. Everything I do has consequences right now. Ethan listened, didn't interrupt, because for the first time he wasn't trying to fix the situation. He was trying to understand it. I care about you, he said. The words hung in the air. Simple. Honest. Aaliyah closed her eyes for a brief moment. I know, she said, and that was the truth, which made the next part harder. But I can't afford to care right now. The words weren't cruel. They were necessary. Ethan looked at her, searching for something. An opening. A hesitation. Anything that might suggest she didn't mean it. But there was none, because this wasn't doubt, it was decision. He exhaled slowly. Okay, he said finally. Not agreement, not acceptance, just acknowledgement. Aaliyah nodded once, then turned, and walked down the steps, not looking back, because looking back would make leaving harder, and leaving was the only way forward. The weeks that followed blurred together, then months. Time didn't slow, it accelerated, because Aaliyah filled every moment she had. Classes became more intense, work hours stretched longer, nights shortened, sleep became optional. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, because now, more than ever, she understood what was at stake. In the library, Marcus Alvarez sat behind his usual desk, but something about him had changed. Not dramatically, subtly, his posture straighter, his focus sharper, his time more divided. A laptop sat open in front of him, lines of code filling the screen. Marcus Alvarez, once just a quiet student balancing work and study, was now building something of his own. His lean frame still carried the same reserved energy, but his eyes, focused, determined, reflected something new. Ambition. What are you working on? Aaliyah asked one evening, setting her books down across from him. Marcus glanced up briefly. Delivery optimization software, he replied. For small businesses, less cost, faster routes. She raised an eyebrow slightly. That sounds big. He shrugged. Maybe. But there was something behind the word. Possibility. I've been testing it, he added. Couple local places are already using it. Aaliyah smiled faintly. That's amazing. Marcus nodded but didn't dwell on it, because like her, he was focused on forward movement, not validation. Their conversations stayed simple. Short, but steady, because sometimes support didn't need to be loud to matter. On campus, something else had begun to shift. Quietly, at first a video, shared between a few students, then more, then everyone. The footage was clear, unmistakable. Aaliyah at the party, the fall, the laughter, the money, the humiliation, no context, no explanation, just truth. Reactions came quickly. Shock, discomfort, denial, some defended it. It was just a joke. Others didn't. That wasn't right. Discussions spread through classrooms, hallways, online forums. Not controlled. Not contained. Professor Elena Ruiz stood at the front of her lecture hall one afternoon, watching her students more than teaching them. She had seen the video. Watched it twice. Not for confirmation, but for understanding. Years ago, she had experienced something similar, not identical but enough to recognize the pattern. The dismissal, the silence, the delay before anyone chose to care. And she had made a decision then, to never ignore it again. A system is not broken because of one moment, she said calmly to her class. It is broken when moments like that are allowed to repeat. No one spoke, because the message was clear. Even if the names weren't said out loud. Ethan Carter stood outside his family's home days later, his phone still in his hand, the video paused on the screen. He had watched it, more than once, and each time it felt worse because he had been there, and he hadn't done enough. Inside, voices echoed. His parents, discussions, dismissals. "We've already addressed it." Margaret Whitmore's voice carried through the door. "There's no need to escalate this further." Ethan's jaw tightened, because to them, it was already over, handled, contained. But to him, it wasn't. He stepped back from the door, because for the first time in his life, he realized something. That silence was a choice, and he didn't want to make that choice anymore. Months passed. Winter faded into early spring, and with it, change. Aaliyah stood in front of the email for a long time before opening it. Her fingers hovered slightly above the keyboard, then, finally, clicked. Congratulations. The word felt unreal. A full scholarship, international program, opportunity, not given, earned. Her breath caught for a moment, then released. Because this was the moment everything had been building toward. Every shift, every sacrifice, every decision. She closed her eyes briefly, then reached for her phone. "Mama?" Denise's voice came through, stronger now, steadier than before. "I got it," Aaliyah said, a pause, then a soft laugh mixed with emotion. "I knew you would." The departure wasn't dramatic. No grand send-off, no audience, just a quiet morning. A single suitcase. A final look at a city that had tested her in ways she hadn't expected. Marcus stood beside her at the curb. "You're going to do great," he said. Aaliyah smiled. "So are you." He nodded once, because he believed it now. For both of them. She stepped into the car, closed the door, and as the city slowly moved behind her, Aaliyah didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she was finally moving toward something. The return. A different woman. Boston welcomed her back with a softer light than she remembered. It was early autumn again, but this time the air felt lighter, less suffocating, as if the city itself had shifted with time. The same streets, the same campus, the same stone buildings that once seemed too large, too cold, too distant. But Aaliyah Brooks was no longer the same person walking through them. Aaliyah Brooks was now a 26-year-old successful African-American woman, confident and composed in appearance. She stood tall, with a strong, balanced posture that came not from effort but from certainty. Her deep brown skin carried a natural radiance, her features sharper, more defined with maturity. Her eyes, still dark brown, no longer held quiet endurance alone, but clarity, awareness, and control. Her natural curls framed her face freely now, no longer restrained into practicality. She wore a tailored professional suit, clean lines, understated elegance. Everything about her presence spoke of discipline transformed into power. She stepped onto campus without hesitation. Not rushing, not shrinking, not blending in, because she no longer needed to. Students passed by, some glancing at her briefly, others not noticing at all. But there was a difference. Subtle, but real. She wasn't invisible anymore, not because the world had changed entirely, but because she had. Inside the main auditorium, preparations were underway. Rows of seats filled gradually, conversations humming with anticipation. Word had spread quickly. An alumni speaker, a success story, someone who had built something beyond the limits placed in front of her. Professor Elena Ruiz stood near the stage, reviewing notes, her posture steady as always. Professor Elena Ruiz, now in her mid-40s, carried the same composed authority she always had. Her presence had only strengthened over time. Her olive-toned skin and sharp, observant eyes reflected years of navigating systems that rarely made space for people like her. Today, she wore a dark academic suit, her hair still tied in a neat bun. but there was something new in her expression. Pride. Not loud, not obvious, but present, because she remembered. Everything. "Aaliyah," she said as their eyes met. Aaliyah smiled. "Professor." No long introduction, no unnecessary words, just recognition and respect. "You've done well," Elena said quietly. Aaliyah shook her head slightly. "I've done what I had to." Elena gave a small nod. Sometimes that's the same thing. The auditorium filled. Students, faculty, guests, and among them, familiar faces. Marcus Alvarez stood near the back at first, then slowly made his way closer to the front. Marcus Alvarez was no longer just a quiet student behind a library desk. Now 28, he carried himself with a different kind of confidence. Earned, not inherited. His lean frame remained, but his posture had straightened, his movements more assured. His once simple clothing had been replaced with a clean, modern business style, still understated but intentional. His eyes, still observant, now held something else. Ownership. His startup had grown. What began as a small optimization tool had expanded into a logistics platform used by multiple local businesses. It wasn't massive, not yet, but it was real. And it was his. When Aaliyah spotted him in the crowd, her expression softened slightly, because some things didn't need to change to matter. Near the side of the room, another figure stood alone. Ethan Carter. Time had changed him, too. Ethan Carter, now 28, still carried the same calm presence, but it had deepened. His athletic build remained, but his posture was less casual now, more deliberate. His gray-blue eyes no longer simply observed. They reflected understanding shaped by choices, by distance, by consequence. His clothing was simple, refined, but no longer tied to the expectations of his family's world, because he had stepped away from it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. He didn't approach, didn't interrupt, he simply watched. Because this moment wasn't his to take. Aaliyah stepped onto the stage. The same hall where once she had walked unnoticed. Now, every seat faced her, every voice quieted. She stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly against its surface. For a moment, she said nothing. Not because she didn't have words, but because silence held power. Then she began. "I used to walk into this building hoping not to be seen." The room stilled further. "Not because I didn't belong here," she continued, "but because being seen came with consequences." She paused briefly, her gaze moving across the audience, not searching, not avoiding, just present. "I worked multiple jobs. I studied between shifts. I survived in a space that didn't always recognize me as equal." No bitterness, no anger, just truth. "And one night," she said, her voice steady, "I learned what it meant to be seen in the worst way possible." A ripple moved through the room. Because they knew. The video, it had resurfaced days earlier. Not quietly, not contained, but publicly shared, analyzed, impossible to ignore, on screens across campus, across networks, across conversations. The footage played, clear, unedited. The fall, the laughter, the money, the silence. Crystal Whitmore's face, unmistakable, exposed. In the audience now, Crystal sat still. Gone was the effortless confidence. Gone was the control. Crystal Whitmore, once the center of every room, now appeared smaller somehow. Her posture rigid, her expression tight. Her perfectly styled hair and expensive clothing remained, but they no longer carried the same authority. Her icy blue eyes avoided direct contact, shifting downward, away from the stage. Because the narrative had changed. Apologies had come. Public, private, formal, emotional. But apologies didn't erase memory. Aaliyah looked out across the room. "I could stand here and tell you that what happened made me stronger," she said, "and maybe it did." A pause, but the truth is, no one should have to be broken to prove their worth. The words landed differently, because they weren't about her anymore. They were about everyone listening, every system, every silence, every moment that had been ignored. In the years since, she continued, I've learned that success isn't about proving people wrong. Her voice softened slightly. It's about refusing to let them define you in the first place. No applause yet. No movement. Because the room wasn't ready, not until she finished. I don't stand here today because everything was fair, she said. I stand here because I chose to keep moving, even when it wasn't. Then, she stepped back. Silence. For a single second. Then, applause, rising, growing. Not forced, not polite, real. After the event, conversations filled the space again, but differently this time. Quieter, more reflective. Professor Elena Ruiz stood near the stage receiving recognition from faculty members, her work acknowledged more openly than before. It wasn't just about Aaliyah's success, it was about what had been allowed to exist and what needed to change. At a distance, Marcus approached Aaliyah. You did good, he said simply. She smiled. So did you. He nodded, because they both understood this wasn't the end. Just another step. Outside the building, the air felt calm. Ethan stood near the entrance, waiting, not expecting, just present. When Aaliyah stepped out, their eyes met. No surprise, no tension, just recognition. He didn't move forward immediately. Neither did she, because some things didn't need to be rushed. Finally, he spoke. You changed a lot of things in there. Aaliyah considered that, then shook her head slightly. I just told the truth. A pause, then a small, quiet smile. Between them. Not the same as before, not unfinished, just different. Because respect had replaced uncertainty. Understanding had replaced distance. And whatever came next wouldn't be built on illusion. In the weeks that followed, change extended beyond the campus. The hospital where Denise had once struggled to receive immediate care implemented new policies, review systems, response protocols, oversight measures. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Because sometimes, change didn't come from intention. It came from exposure and accountability. Aaliyah stood once more at the edge of the campus, looking out over the same paths she had once walked in silence. She didn't need to prove anything anymore, didn't need to fight for space in the same way because she had already done that, and now, she moved forward, not defined by what happened, but shaped by what she chose to become. This story reminds us of something simple, but powerful. The way we treat people every day matters more than we think. Respect should never depend on money, status, or skin color. In real life, there are still many Aaliyahs quietly fighting battles we cannot see. A kind word, a fair action, or even choosing not to stay silent can change someone's entire path. We also learn that strength is not about reacting with anger, but about moving forward with purpose. Aaliyah did not win by proving others wrong. She won by refusing to let their judgment define her future. That is a lesson we can all carry into our own lives. If you see injustice, do not look away. If you have the chance to help, do not hesitate. And if you are the one struggling, remember that your story is not finished yet. Take a moment today to reflect on how you treat others. Choose respect. Choose empathy. Choose to be better. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us what you think. And if you believe in standing up for what is right, type Amen in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories that inspire change. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your path every day.